I'm Falarin Iman. We're on your TV, radio and online.
We're with you until midday with today's big stories. Lots of discussion on some of the big stories in relation to the economy and the Labour Party conference today.
Yes, and we want to hear your views as usual, so get them in at gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll try and get to as many as we can throughout the programme, but first, here's your latest headlines.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, the pound is appearing to recover some of its losses as the markets open this morning. Sterling hit a record-breaking low against the dollar yesterday following the government's tax-cutting budget. Several banks, including Halifax and Virgin Money, have withdrawn some mortgage products after the Bank of England said it wouldn't hesitate to raise interest rates. Attempting to steady the markets, the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, says he'll bring forward what he calls a medium-term fiscal plan to start bringing down debt levels. Economic commentator Laurie Laird told GB News she believes the pound may fall again.
I can tell you that the pound has stabilised a bit. We're at between 107 and 108. How long we stay here is anyone's guess. Neither statement from the Treasury, neither the one from the Treasury, one from the Bank of England were particularly convincing to me. So I wouldn't be surprised to see people have another pop at the pound. We've stabilised now, but I think we'll try it. We'll see another sell-off at some point sooner rather than later.
The Labour leader will use today's party conference speech to offer the country what he calls a fresh start. Sir Keir Starmer will commit to getting the UK out of a so-called, he says, endless cycle of crisis. He's also going to quote Sir Tony Blair, who once described Labour as the political wing of the British people. Sir Keir will go into the speech encouraged by latest polling. A YouGov survey showed that Labour's opened up a 17-point lead over the Conservatives. We'll bring you that speech here. Ofgem has issued a warning to most of the UK's gas and electricity suppliers that they need to provide more support to households who are struggling to pay their bills. The energy regulator says all providers, bar one, need to fulfil their obligations in helping customers who have difficulty in paying. Following a market review, it found process failures in companies giving help to those who need payment plans. British Gas is the only supplier found not to have any major issues. Workers at the UK's largest shipping container port are staging fresh strikes from today in a dispute over pay. Around 1,900 members of the Unite union at Felixstowe have walked out this morning following an 8-day stoppage last month. The strike is planned to continue until next Wednesday. Our reporter spoke to some of those on the picket line.
We estimated or calculated that the company has made close to £250 million over the last 2 years. And as workers who generate that profit, we believe we deserve a decent pay rise. And we believe the company can afford it. They're choosing not to.
They should be taken as serious because it's a very serious matter at the end of the day. We need to get this resolved so we can all get back into work and carry on with our jobs.
The head of Britain's biggest police force says he wants to hear from those who feel they've been let down by the service. It's Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley who said the organisation has been far too weak and constructive anger from the public can bring positive change. Sir Mark took over as the boss at Scotland Yard earlier this month and says he's determined to get the culture right. Japan has held a state funeral for the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the first such funeral in 55 years. Abe's ashes were carried in a military procession through central Tokyo to a 19-gun salute. Thousands of spectators queued to lay flowers and bowed to a picture of the former premier. The ceremony, though, was not without controversy. Nationwide protests took place, arguing that the event was too expensive, being held at a time of economic struggle in the country. Prince William and wife Catherine will visit Wales in their first official trip since taking on their new royal titles. The new Prince and Princess of Wales will travel from Holyhead in North Wales to Swansea in the southwest. They'll meet with local businesses and communities and learn about the work of key charities. King Charles's new cipher has been released as the period of royal mourning ends. It features the King's first initial, C, intertwined with the letter R for Rex, which is Latin for king. His Majesty's monogram will appear on government buildings, state documents and some post boxes. New banknotes featuring the King are also expected to enter into circulation by mid-2024, with his portrait appearing on existing designs of all 4 denominations. The Royal Mail have unveiled 4 new stamps in memory of the late Queen. The stamps have been approved by King Charles III and they'll go on sale from November. The second-class stamps in the collection mark the Queen's accession and coronation, while the first-class stamps show the monarch standing in her Admiral's cloak. You're up to date now on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Muroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman. We're on your TV, radio and online. We're here with you for 2 hours, so here's what's coming up.
Well, are Labour now the party of economic competence? That's certainly what they're trying to project. We'll bring you all of the latest developments from the Labour Party's annual conference ahead of Sir Keir Starmer's speech later today.
Yes, and speaking of the economy, the pound has made a slight recovery after plummeting to a historic low yesterday. Well, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan will be giving us the latest on that.
And transgender charity Mermaids has come under fire after an investigation by The Telegraph found the charity had given out chest-flattening devices to young girls against their parents' wishes.
Yeah, we'll tell you all about that a bit later. Well, that's all coming up in this hour and more as well. And we'd love to hear from you. So get in touch at GBViews at gbnews.uk and we'll get to your views throughout the programme.
Well, later today, Sir Keir Starmer will make his leader's speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves laid out her vision for the economy amid the turmoil in the markets.
Yes, well, our political reporter Catherine Forster sent us this update.
Labour are in Liverpool with a spring in their step, consistently ahead in the polls. They believe that after 12 long years in opposition, they could be soon heading back to government. Beginning with the national anthem for the first time ever went smoothly. And Labour spies an opportunity as the government tilts sharply to the right, hands top earners tax breaks, and the markets remain volatile. Monday was Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves' keynote speech. She did not hold back.
And now, they have replaced levelling up with trickle down. I dare any Tory MP to tell a nurse or a care worker to their face that what our country needs right now is bigger bonuses for bankers. The Chancellor and Prime Minister, meanwhile, resemble 2 desperate gamblers in a casino, chasing a losing run. But here's the thing, they're not gambling with their money, they're gambling with yours. They've lost credibility, they're losing confidence, they're out of control.
But as well as shouting from the sidelines about what they think the government is getting wrong, conference is Labour's golden opportunity to set out their alternative vision to their own members in the hall and, much more importantly, voters round the country. Reeves pledged
Labour will not waver in our commitment to fiscal responsibility. Every policy that Labour announces and every line in our manifesto will be carefully costed and fully funded. Wealth doesn't trickle from the top down. It comes from the bottom up and the middle out.
Labour outlined their Green Prosperity Plan and an £8 billion investment.
The next Labour government will create a national wealth fund so that when we invest in new industries, in partnership with business, the British people will own a share of that wealth, and the taxpayer will get a return on that investment.
And alongside plans for a national living wage and abolition of business rates came a promise of more nurses, health visitors, and a doubling of the number of places in medical school. Finishing, she said,
Let me tell you, it's time for a government that is on your side. That government is a Labour government, and be in no doubt, conference, that government is on its way. Thank you.
When Boris Johnson swept the Conservatives to an 80-seat majority not even 3 years ago, many assumed Labour would take a decade to become electable again. But now they sense that government may just be within their grasp. Catherine Forster, GB News.
Very robust words, I think, and robust tone there from Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor. Well, our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool for us this morning. Good morning, Tom. So today is a big day, I believe, in that we're expecting the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, to make his leader speech.
That's right. Sir Keir Starmer will be speaking at around 2 p.m. this afternoon, so we'll be looking ahead to that. But I'm delighted to be joined here live at the GB News booth on the conference floor of the Labour Party conference, by Peter Kyle, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Looking ahead to Sir Keir Starmer's speech, there's one big headline, one big pre-briefing note about it, and that's that Blairism is back, is it?
Well, the centre ground is back. You know, our political system works because you have two parties in the majority view of where the public want parties to be, and they're battling out for where the majority of the public are. But right now, the Tory party, because of its budget last week and a few other issues, has leapt off the centre ground. So there is a big weight and a burden on the Labour Party now, because we are the party that represents the majority view of the public. So yes, Tony Blair was the last Labour leader that won that kind of argument with the public. So to connect ourselves to it, in the same way that Blair connected himself to Wilson and Attlee, the other two winning leaders of the Labour Party, we're plonking ourselves absolutely front and centre in the winning traditions of the Labour Party at its best.
Were taxes too low under Tony Blair?
No, they were right for the moment. You know, we're in a different era now. I mean, a lot has changed. We've had a series of crises, some of them caused by national and international situations, others caused by mismanagement of our economy and our society by the governing party we've been in for 12 years, and the lack of preparation for building of resilience in our economy and in our society. So we have to now think about the taxation levels, but also the investment in public services to build resilience, and also our infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure was never a massive issue in some previous generations, but now it absolutely is, and the lack of investment in it. So these are the issues that we're going to have to tackle, and you'll see Keir Starmer setting out a framework for how we will govern to tackle the big issues of the day.
The reason I ask the question, of course, is because the Conservative government is returning the top level of tax to what it was under Tony Blair. The Labour Party now suggesting that they'll raise it back up again. It wasn't so long ago that Sir Keir Starmer was saying that the tax burden is too high, that taxes are high because growth is low, implying that the tax burden should come down. Is there a risk now that the Labour Party is going into the next election proposing a sweep of tax rises?
No, actually, what you've seen is the Labour Party taxing fairly, spending wisely. That's the framework through which we apply all of our spending commitments and our investment commitments and our tax raising. The one difference between the Labour Party and the Tory party right now is that we had the biggest spending splurge in peacetime history last week, not a single measure really significantly on revenue generation. Now, what the Labour Party has been very clear on is where the money's going to come from, not just borrowing. With our cost of living package in the summer, which is a big spending commitment, there was borrowing involved, but there was also revenue generation through a windfall tax. Now, we're being responsible, taxing fairly, spending wisely, and that's, I think, the framework that you'll see with Keir's speech, and you certainly saw with Rachel yesterday, who talked about fiscal discipline. Now, this is the Labour Party. Rachel got a massive round of applause for talking about fiscal discipline, and that is something that you've traditionally associated with the Conservative values. All Conservative values no longer have the stranglehold and the grip on spending wisely and taxing fairly anymore. That's gone out of the window. That's now with us, and I think you'll see that message reinforced with Keir today.
Is there a gap here between presentation and policy? Because yesterday we did hear the Shadow Chancellor talk a lot about fiscal responsibility, but in that same speech we heard debt-funded spending spending commitments, i.e. the idea that raising tax back up to where it is now following cuts would then fund extra spending. That's obviously debt funded in that way, because that's losing revenue and only returning it to where it was.
Unlike the Conservative Party, the Labour Party will not borrow for revenue. We will borrow to invest. Now, what Rachel outlined yesterday was our investment pledge, which would invest to recapitalise the British economy, which would reduce inflation, and it would get our economy going in terms of being prepared for net carbon zero. So, for example, insulating 10 million homes. If we'd started that programme when Rachel announced it the year before, 2 million homes would have been insulated in the last year, and each of those homes would have had £480 reduced from their energy bill here. That's the kind of strategic, sensible policy making that takes us in the right direction, has a good impact on investment, and is transforming our economy and creating brilliant jobs up and down the country in the industries of the future. So that's the approach that the Labour is taking. We've been very honest that we would borrow to tackle some of the big issues of the day, including suppressing the cost of living crisis. Under Labour, you wouldn't have paid a penny more over the winter for energy bills. With the Tories, it's going up by another £500.
Although with a £400 payment that takes it to roughly the same level.
But net would be a £500 increase and a double on the cost it would have been the year before. So, but with us, we would have borrowed for some of it, but we would also have balanced it with those companies making the
That's remarkably candid
tax.
there, because of course there is some borrowing there. We know that a windfall tax would not cover the whole thing, not close to it. But looking at that and looking at the market response to the borrowing that the government has undertaken and has announced it will undertake from Friday, why would that be significantly different under the Labour Party, given that we would still see huge historic furlough-style borrowing to deal with the cost of living crisis?
No, because we had a balance of revenue and borrowing. The balance was there, and it was fully costed, and it was within the orthodoxy of how Britain and advanced economies tackle big challenges at times that we're in. Just for example, when we landed our policy announcement before the cap was raised at the end on energy prices at the end of August, the Institute of Financial Studies, the IFS, lots of other think tanks came out and they endorsed the policy. Now, Paul Johnson, the director of the IFS, came out, and when he was asked a question in the morning interviews that he gave, have Labour provided enough information? He said, I think they provided too much information. For an opposition party, I think they're going a bit overboard on the detail. Now,
the IFS did also question some of the ways in which it was funded, this idea that you could hope that the cost of debt would go down and that would cover some things. He did say that there is borrowing involved.
They endorsed the headline figures of it. You know, we would dispute it, but we're talking about in the margins here. But the principle is this, that yes, we've been very upfront that we would borrow, but we would also generate revenue. Now, for us, we think that if you have companies who are not making enormous advances in profits based on guile, strategic thinking and cunning decisions made by the people running those businesses, but simply because they are making enormous profits based on the back of Vladimir Putin invading another country, we think it's fair when everybody in society is going to go through a really challenging economic situation, that those companies who are making more money on the back of that situation should just contribute a bit more in that period. And when even the chief executives of those companies accept the principle of that, it is extraordinarily ideological to say that actually we won't take that money. That money will be lost to the British taxpayers, and that debt will be loaded on future generations via the energy companies, not even by central government, but by the energy companies. The reason we have an energy price cap in the first place is because those companies have been treating their consumers unfairly in the previous period. They've admitted this. I was on the select committee that looked into all of this. They came before us and said, yes, disadvantaged customers were paying a disproportionate set of fees than advantaged ones, and all customers were being unfairly treated because they were piling incentives into new customers at the expense of existing customers. The market was broken. So we know these energy companies need to have strong regulation. There needs to be strong interaction from government. But when you get that relationship right, the market works better for consumers. And that's the approach that we've been taking.
It's a fascinating point to raise that windfall tax, because of course the Conservative government imposed a windfall tax, but they don't like to talk about it now. It's very, very peculiar. But Peter Kyle, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News. Back to you, Mercy and Anaya in the studio.
Thank you so much, Tom. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, and that was Peter Carl, the shadow Northern Ireland secretary there, and we'll be bringing you more on the Labour Party conference as it develops today.
Yes, indeed. And as we say there, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is expected to make that leader's speech at 2 o'clock. So, of course, when that happens, we will be analysing everything he says and bringing you all the reaction a bit later on. But for now, let's go to some of your views, some mixed opinion about what Labour's saying and what's happening with the Conservative government at the moment. James says the Conservative government should be fined for years of neglecting Britain's core services and not investing in maintaining them. Some people would very much disagree, especially when it comes to the NHS. They would say, actually, that the figures show there has been, record numbers ploughed into the NHS.
Yeah, I mean, in some senses, this is why we have a democracy. If we're not happy with what a government is doing, we can vote them out.
Yep.
And therefore, an election is coming up, and I'm sure Keir Starmer and Liz Truss are looking at that and manoeuvring in order to win the votes of the people. So that's a way that we can actually hold them to account on that. Well, Michael says Labour are on the side of the unions, and we would be back to the 70s. Scarhill and Red robo-bankrupt in the country. I would never vote for this mob. Well, that is another side to it, whether or not Labour are actually really on the side of the people or are necessarily tied to other organisations.
Yeah, I think it's been quite impressive seeing Labour seem to be positioning themselves as a more responsible party in a way that perhaps they haven't been able to do before, because we weren't in the sort of turmoil, or the Conservative Party wasn't in the sort of turmoil that they are in now. So I think for once, Labour actually do almost seem like grown-ups in the room, and before they, a lot of people didn't take them seriously, and that is why they have not done so well electorally. But we're seeing the polls today; they're massively ahead, further ahead in the polls than they have been for 20 years. So clearly, that is resonating with the general public.
I think there is so much up for grabs over the next 18 months. So I think it is very hard to predict. And maybe the Conservatives are not going to stand on an economy platform. For all we know, they might say, well, getting the Labour Party in government might mean a deal with the SNP, and that would mean another whole set of turmoil for the union. So they may not.
Or they might say a Labour Party means further immigration. Well, they can't say that, can they, anymore, because that is Liz Truss's plan. So get in touch with more of your views, GBViews at gbnews.uk. But after the break, our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, will get us up to date on the currency fluctuations and why some mortgage lenders are actually pulling some of their mortgage deals this morning. Stay with us for that after this break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just turned 10:25. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Mercy Muroki. We're live on your TV, radio and online.
Yeah, well, very shortly we're going to be speaking about what happened yesterday, which was the pound plummeting against the dollar. So did the euro, to be fair. That was low as well. And the reaction of the market and the reaction of the Bank of England and mortgage lenders at the moment, because they've changed their stance this morning. And it won't be very welcome news to people looking to buy a house. But for now, we're just going to go to a couple more of your views. Labour Party conference is happening. Kath asked, why are newspaper and Labour making out that Conservatives are the cause of our pound being low against the dollar when all countries are struggling against the dollar? But the pound is struggling disproportionately, I would say. If you look at all the graphs, very much the pound is distinctly struggling in a way that it hasn't previously.
And it did make a significant dip, particularly when Kwasi Kwarteng announced his so-called mini-budget on Friday. And we also have to remember, if the Labour Party were in power and this was happening, it is likely that people will be holding the government of the day responsible too, because they are overseeing the public purses and the economic situation. So we have to be fair on that. But Robin also says it's a sad state of affairs in UK politics that many of us vote for the least worst party, not because we necessarily like or believe in them, they're just the better than the alternative. Well, that is a very true comment that I think will resonate with a lot of people.
Yes, that's right. And indeed, Labour do want proportional representation. All the parties who aren't the Conservative Party always do want proportional representation, because basically guarantees that you don't have the kind of Conservative majority we see at the moment. But let's return to our top story for now. Labour leader, that's difficult to say, Sir Keir Starmer will make his leader speech at the Labour Party conference, which is happening in Liverpool, of course.
Indeed, but how successful will Labour be in transforming itself into the party of economic credibility? Well, Andy Mayer, Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs and Free Market Economic Think Tank, joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. I mean, what do you make of the fact that the Labour Party are trying to reposition themselves as the economic stronghold of the parties today?
Well, Labour are in the lovely position of being able to not change very much and simply say, we're not this lot. We're not the current government. You can trust us with the economic levers in our hands. And they've actually come up with a programme which is almost identical to not so much some of the new stuff that the Conservatives are bringing in, but what the last Conservative administration tried on. So we're looking at things like central planning of the economy through industrial policy, which is something that the coalition, Boris Johnson and Theresa May, all tried in various forms and has led to the disastrous mess we currently have in our energy system. Labour are going to double down on that. And to be very clear, what they're talking about is Ed Miliband will decide what sort of batteries, hydrogen, and other technologies will deliver the energy of the future. And it is for the British people to decide whether they trust him to do that more than markets and people making investment decisions themselves.
When you said disastrous mess we've got into, for a second I did think you were talking about what's happening with the markets at the moment. You were talking about energy there. But some people would say, look at this mess that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss have got us into. We have the pound plummeting to record new lows. The sorts of policies that Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng announced on Friday, those are policies your organisation have welcomed, have called for. Am I wrong there?
Hang on, what do we think the markets are actually reacting to? Because the bulk of the package isn't the tiny tax cuts that have got the headlines. The 45p rate, for example, is about 1.4 billion of borrowing every year. The energy price guarantee, which we attacked as middle-class welfare on steroids, is 100 to 200 billion pounds in the course of a year.
Well, is it not partly unfunded, tax cuts? They want to increase borrowing and also cut taxes without cutting spending.
Well, on that, the IEA would agree with you.
Yeah.
So we are in favour of lower taxes and a smaller state, but also sound money, crucially.
Well, are you admitting that this isn't a sound and well-funded
I'm admitting it's not my personal plan.
Okay.
And the IEA doesn't take a corporate view on these things. We have a range of voices. Some are more keen on the idea that's being put forward, which is actually conventional left-wing modern monetary theory, which is the idea that the government can borrow money forever And then the growth will take care of the rest, so long as that money is borrowed for investment. And that seems to be the core of what Kwasi Kwarteng is doing, at the same time as doing the things that we would approve of, which are supply-side reform, which gets the government out of the way of stopping new investment. Now, the 45p tax rate is an interesting policy, and it's got a heck of a lot of headlines, and it seems to be politically ill-judged at the current time.
Yeah.
But in economic terms,
it doesn't bring in much money. Yes, I mean, 2 billion or something. But at the end of the day, the symbolic point for a lot of people is important. At a time when there is a cost of living crisis, it doesn't look great for most ordinary people to see that the top individuals, most wealthiest individuals, are getting more money in their pockets.
Yeah, and I think what the Chancellor was thinking there is he'd get his unpopular policies out of the way first, but he's not at the start of a 5-year term. He's facing an election in 2 years, come what may. And it'll be interesting to see whether this is the policy he's remembered for, or whether the things that are coming down the line, for example, raising allowances is possible, cutting other taxes, are the things that will then make people decide that they are better off when it comes to 2024.
Do you think there's a chance, actually, that people will look at their pay packets and look at their energy bills in a couple of months' time and say, look, I'm not paying as much as I was expecting to pay because the government have introduced this cap. I have a bit more money in my pocket, which is nice, and just say, you know what, I'll take it.
Well, that, in theory, would be great, but what we know is that energy bills are going up. They may not be going up as much as they would be if the market was allowed to let a rip on them, but where they will be is more than they were before. At the same time, interest rates will rise, so those paying mortgages and coming to the end of their deals or on variable rates will be paying more as well. So you can't buck the cost of living crisis. We're all in this mess because global energy prices are going up, and this is affecting absolutely everything. And the government's tried to suppress some of that, but no government anywhere can suppress all of it, and it can't just be transferred onto future generations because you get the market reaction we're just seeing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Andy Mayer, Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs, which is a free market economic think tank, sharing his thoughts on some of the policies that have been announced by the Labour Party and the Conservatives in the last few weeks.
Yes, well, share your thoughts or keep on sharing your thoughts as well. The email is gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let us know what you think about, well, Liz Truss and the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's management of the economy so far. They haven't had long to show. And what are you expecting to hear? What do you want to hear from Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer when he speaks later on? Let us know. That's all coming up after this morning's headlines.
A very good morning. It's 10:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The pound is appearing to recover some of its losses as the markets opened this morning. Sterling hit a record-breaking low against the dollar yesterday following the government's tax-cutting budget. Well, several banks, including Halifax and Virgin Money, have withdrawn some mortgage products after the Bank of England said it wouldn't hesitate to raise interest rates. Attempting to steady the markets, the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, says he'll bring forward what he calls a medium-term fiscal plan to start bringing down debt levels. The Labour leader is going to use today's party conference speech to offer the country what he says is a fresh start. Sir Keir Starmer will commit to getting the UK out of a so-called endless cycle of crisis. He'll also quote Sir Tony Blair, who once described Labour as the political wing of the British people. Sir Keir will go into the speech encouraged by the latest YouGov polling, which shows Labour 7 points ahead. Workers at the UK's largest shipping container port are staging new strikes from today in a dispute over pay. It's around 1,900 members of the Unite union at Felixstowe who've walked out this morning. It follows an 8-day stoppage last month. The strike is planned to continue until next Wednesday. Ofgem has issued a warning to most of the UK's gas and electricity suppliers, saying they need to improve the processes in place to help households who are struggling to pay their bills. Following a review, the regulator says all providers, bar one, need to fulfil their obligations in supporting customers who need payment plans. British Gas is the only supplier found not to have any major issues. The Royal Mail have unveiled 4 new stamps in memory of the Queen. They were approved by King Charles III and they go on sale from November. They feature images of the late monarch throughout the years. TV, online, DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Well, talking of finance, let's have a quick look at a snapshot of today's market. The pound will buy you $1.080 and 1.123 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,514 and 9 pence per ounce.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning. It's 10:37 and this is To The Point with Inaya Falarin Iman and myself, Mercy Muroki. We're on GB News and we're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yeah, so at conference yesterday, Labour's Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy promised to tackle the housing crisis. She said that the Tories had, quote, turned housing into a racket.
Yes, well, landlords, however, aren't too happy with some of the policies announced by Labour. Ben Beadle, who's chief executive of the National Residential Landlords Association, said, quote, it is depressing that the Labour Party is once again demonising all landlords. The vast majority do a good job providing a fifth of all housing in the country. That is why private tenants are more likely to be satisfied with their accommodation than those in social rented sector.
Well, let's speak now to him, Ben Beadle, Chief Executive of the National Residential Landlords Association, who is also at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. What specifically do you object to in relation to what Labour have said? I mean, for example, when you look at landlords, you can understand why a lot of people have a bit of scepticism towards them. You know, they're making money without necessarily producing goods in the same way that other people do, and oftentimes raise rents above inflation and so on. So what's your issue with what Lisa Nandy said?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I think the issue is that government have subbed out their provision of homes in this country, and landlords are doing a better job than in the social sector. That's borne out by the English Housing Survey, that time and time again says that more renters are satisfied with their accommodation than in the social sector. And I would just sort of take issue with that point, increasing rents above inflation. In the year to August, rents in the private rented sector increased by 3.4%. That includes in-tenancy increases and rent rises that as properties come to the market. That's significantly lower than inflation, and it's also significantly lower than the 4.1 social housing rent increase that occurred in April. So I think it's really, really important that we balance the facts here. It may be an inconvenient truth that things are better in the private rented sector, and I think what what we're looking for is for Lisa Nandy to acknowledge that the private rented sector does have a part to play in the provision of safe, secure homes for renters.
Do you think some of what she is calling for is unfair? Because she's pledged to create this renters charter, which would, for instance, give renters the right to have pets, the right to make alterations to a property, introduce a 4-month notice period for landlords, for example. Do you think there's a chance that those kinds of measures would actually put landlords off actually renting their properties and say, look, this is too much hassle and I'm just not going to do it?
Well, I mean, it's the private sector for a reason, right? You know, there needs to be sort of that freedom of choice. But I fail to get too excited about commitments about pets. The Tory government announced this months ago, and similarly a whole range of other measures. And what Lisa Nandy has done is copy the Conservative Party fairer renting white paper and given it an injection of adrenaline, put it on steroids, whatever metaphor you want to use. I don't think it is reasonable, to be honest with you, that landlords have to give 4 months' notice. If you are experiencing antisocial behaviour, that's going to be causing misery, maybe not for the landlord even, but for neighbours. Do you really want to wait 4 months' notice before you can apply to the court to get a troublesome tenant out? I don't think you would.
Just as I mean, it's a minority, just as you're saying that it's a minority of landlords that may be rogue and so on, the overwhelming majority of tenants actually live and care for the properties that they are living in. So what is wrong with, for example, more rights being given to tenants when they're actually living there, they're building a life and a family oftentimes there, and therefore want that greater protection?
I think it's just getting the balance right, to be honest with you. So, you know, as I say, I don't think it's reasonable that we have extensive notice periods to deal with some of the most egregious problems. I don't think it's reasonable that we have discretionary grounds for rent arrears. You know, if somebody is not able to pay their rent, then I'm afraid landlords, be them private or social landlords, do need to deal with that. So I was really surprised, and I was at the announcement yesterday, that we didn't see measures that would increase supply to help renters in the short term. We have a commitment, a jam tomorrow policy for social housing, and that's fine and dandy, but the need is now. And we didn't see any commitments about helping people who are the most vulnerable by unfreezing local housing allowance. So, you know, you're absolutely right. Landlords and tenants have a great working relationship. We have some issues around the edges, but it's really, really important that we don't bring in policy based on the extremes of the market. We should cater for the many, not the few, to coin a phrase.
Yes, where have I heard that one before? Thank you, Ben Beadle, Chief Executive there of the National Residential Landlords Association. I think I have a more favourable view of landlords, mainly because mainly because I'm a capitalist, and I think if and probably because I have a daughter, and I think if one day I might want to make an investment in some property to leave for my child, and these things that Labour are calling for. Yes, I understand there is a need to strengthen renters' rights in many cases, but there is also the possibility of making it unreasonable demands on landlords who, let's not forget, most of them are just regular people who've invested in a property. You know, they're not millionaires. They've invested in a property to rent. The likelihood is that they just want that extra wealth for themselves and their family. I don't think they should be demonised.
Well, I don't think it's about demonising, but I do think, you know, when it comes to landlordism, it's not necessarily anything that actually produces goods or services for the economy in any kind of particularly productive way. And oftentimes people just wait for the housing market to inflate so they can kind of be the beneficiaries of that, when there's a whole generation of people, Generation Z, who can't get on the housing ladder and have that option.
But is that fair? Because, they are providing a service by giving somebody a literal home who might otherwise be on the street.
This is the key point that I agreed with our guest on in relation to the fact that there should be, in my personal view, way, way, way more options for social housing. Back in the 1960s, it was something like one in 4 people, 1 in 5 people were in social housing. It is completely unheard of, really, for most young people to be able to get social housing today. So I do think that there should be reforms on the supply side.
Yeah, I think that's something we can all agree on, that we have not built enough homes over a very, very long time. And that's something, whichever party, Labour, Conservatives, who come into power, that's one of the biggest problems they will face when it comes to housing. But let us know what you think, as usual, GBVs at gbnews.uk. Now let's move on to something else which has troubled myself and Niall quite a lot. We've had lots of discussions about this, and I'm sure it will trouble you too. Transgender children's charity Mermaids have come under fire because an investigation by The Telegraph found that the charity had given out chest-flattening devices to young girls against their wishes.
And indeed, medical experts have highlighted the dangers of chest binding, saying they can cause problems including for breastfeeding difficulties and also broken ribs. So this is a very serious thing for any child to be given.
Yeah, so the chest binders, we were just showing some images there on the TV, but for those listening to us, chest binder, if you don't know what chest binders are, if a young girl has started puberty and she decides she now identifies as a boy and wants to transition to a boy, some charities, this one allegedly, can give them chest binders, or they can get it online as well, where they essentially wrap this sort of tape or this band around their chest so as to flatten their chest so that they can appear to be a boy, so that they can essentially flatten their breasts if they're trying to transition. The problem is here, it's without their parents' consent. But this charity says it's aiming to support transgender children and their families, but campaigners have called for regulators to step in and launch an investigation into safeguarding.
Yeah, and I mean, this question of safeguarding keeps coming up. It does seem that we've been throwing it out of the window in recent years because of gender ideology. Well, joining us now is Kelly J. Keane, founder of Standing for Women, a campaign group which specifically focuses on the rights of women and making sure that the definition of women is clearly defined. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme, Kelly J. I mean, what do you make of this? I just mentioned the fact that safeguarding issues seem to no longer be a priority when it comes to charities, particularly when it comes to working with children. And is this not just yet another example that something that, you know, could actually have long-term harmful effects for the development of young girls is being ignored?
Well, you know, when it comes to Mermaids, their CEO is Susie Green, and I think it's a stretch to expect any safeguarding from a woman who took her son to Thailand to have him castrated at the age of 16. So they have been propagating this nonsense that a child can be born in the wrong body for a really long time. They're in our schools. They have a lot of power, and it's about time that was really clearly looked at, and all that power was absolutely without hesitation taken away from them.
When I first read about this story, it made me think of foot binding or feet binding, which was a practice which used to take place in China, where they would bind little girls' feet really tightly so to make them really small, and it was a status symbol essentially. It was seen as sort of, if you have really tiny feet, you're more feminine, and it just made me think we consider that barbaric now, or we would, yet the same people who might consider that barbaric, there are people who might say, actually, no, this is binding girls' breasts, this is completely different, and we're just being inclusive. How do they square that circle?
I don't know, because I suspect they'd be the same about female genital mutilation or breast ironing. But obviously that happens to far less progressive people. So we can certainly look down upon those people while celebrating the progressiveness of causing abscesses, cracked ribs, breathing difficulties. I mean, I know in schools, there are people trained in schools to basically give girls a little bit of allowances in PE because they know they can't breathe. I mean, how on earth is anyone upholding this really dangerous practice? And why aren't we thinking, what has happened to our society in which breasts are seen as such a fundamental measure of whether or not you're sexualized? It's a whole big issue that I think we need to be talking about. What are we doing to young women? What about the porn that's streaming into our teenagers' phones? What is it that we're doing that means that breasts, so men that want to be women, they focus on breasts. Women that want to be seen as not women focus on breasts. I think we really have to go back to the drawing board when it comes to what is being a woman in 2022. And it cannot be just on the basis of our mammary glands. It has to be that we're full humans, and then we can embrace the bodies in which we're born, as opposed to try and carve them up and spit them out for some sort of notion of misogyny and lip service to something that we refuse to even name.
And also, Kelly J. Keane, I mean, do you think that the government is now listening to this? I mean, we have had, for example, Kemi Badenoch, when she was running, talking about the trans issue, and Liz Truss did make some words about the definition of women in the run-up to her campaign. But do you really feel like this government is one that's going to take these issues seriously?
I think that would be measured in whether or not we remove this immediately from schools, and whether we have a really good campaign on safeguarding for our children when it comes to being online. We know that there are some really quite horrible men who go through all the social media sites that are occupied by young people in order to gaslight them, groom them into this particular cult. So until we see an absolute end to this stuff being peddled in schools, I don't think we can take this government very seriously.
Yeah, well, look, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this. It's always a pleasure to have you on, Kelly J. Keane there. She's founder of Standing for Women. And now Mermaids obviously not here to defend themselves, but they have released a statement on their website in response to this Telegraph article. They say Mermaids takes a harm reduction position with the understanding that providing a young person with a binder and comprehensive safety guidelines from an experienced member of staff is preferable to the likely alternative of unsafe practices and or continued gender dysphoria. The risk is considered by Mermaid staff within the context of our safeguarding framework. So,
well, that is their statement. But, you know, I do worry that it does veer on the side of emotional blackmail, that, you know, if we don't follow this particular path, that the alternative is, you know, these kids are going to experience this, that and the other. And I don't think that's a very balanced and level-headed way of approaching these issues. But
yes, well, I'm sure you at home have some words to say about this. Let us know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. But we're going to finish off the hour with some of the headlines that you might have missed. First, let's start with this. A heartbroken woman has sparked a furious debate online after asking whether it's ever acceptable to take time off work to deal with a breakup.
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit about this before the show. It's quite interesting. The post generated a lot of response, somewhat sympathetic, but many questioned this and said that she needed to grow up effectively. She added, "My job is mentally demanding and it's not the sort of environment where being emotionally vulnerable is a good idea. Yeah, I'm in absolute turmoil inside." What do you think? I mean, my thoughts are, I'm quite sceptical, but...
Well, I think that, you know, OK, I'm not denying that this woman was traumatised by this heartbreak. You never know, you know, how people are feeling. But people go through things every single day, don't they? You know, people go through bereavements and still come to work. You know, even people who lose a pet, that can really affect some people if it's a family pet. So people are always going through things. Do you have a right to time off every time you go through something that's quite upsetting? I don't think you do, well, because we'd lose so much productivity. And, you know, sometimes you just need to say, look, I have to suck it up, just do my job. But, I think if you have a good relationship with an employer, then it perhaps doesn't hurt to say, look, I'm not in a good state. Can I just take the day off?
Yeah, no, I think there's a few different points. I think it depends on the job. I mean, I was reading some people saying if you have a job that requires, you know, immense concentration, a surgeon or a pilot, then actually if you are emotionally unstable in that particular moment, it may not be necessarily helpful. But often, if it's a breakup, it's going to take you more than a day, usually, to get over it. So maybe you should.
Doesn't take me more than a day. Just like next. Anyway.
Well, if it's such a big thing like that, maybe they need annual leave for a week, get a holiday rather than a sick day.
But then again, I do think, look, if you're having open heart surgery, for example, if that person breaks up with their spouse, the surgeon breaks up with their spouse, absolutely they shouldn't call into work. Like, I'm really heartbroken. I'm an emotional wreck, so I can't come in to give.
Times.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I think, look, it's not a right you should necessarily have. I think it's up to employers to be reasonable and say, look, fine, I'll give you 1 or 2 days off, but don't take the mickey.
I mean, what happened to a stiff upper lip? What happened to stoicism? I feel like all of our values now is all about emotional vulnerability, you know, speaking about all these issues very publicly, even getting your employer involved. Sometimes, actually, work can be a good distraction from something difficult that you're going through.
It is seen as a virtue, isn't it, these days, when you're being open about your relationship and spilling all and things like that. And I've been reading a book recently which argues the opposite, that actually it's not very virtuous to be we don't need to keep telling everybody to open up and let your emotions go and all this stuff all the time. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people just like to keep it in and carry on with their day, and that's fine. They shouldn't be forced to be emotional.
Yeah, keep calm and carry on. Just one quick point. I mean, this is also quite gendered, because I feel like if a guy said, you know what, I've had a breakup, I'm really emotional, most people would be like, get over it, mate.
Yeah,
but for a woman,
I might be one of those people, to be honest. But anyway,
well, keep your thoughts going.
Yes, keep them coming in, GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views after this break.
Hello, I'm Aidan McKiven from the Met Office. Some sunshine out there today, but a number of showers, and it will be damp in the far southwest with some persistent rain for parts of Cornwall and West Devon, with this weather front which just slides in from the west. It really only affects the far southwest, perhaps thickens up the cloud for Northern Ireland as well. And another feature will bring some heavy showers to the north of Scotland. These showers could be combined with rumbles of thunder, and there'll be blustery winds as well coming from the north. Those northerly winds will also push showers into the north of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, northwest England and North Wales. And we've got that persistent rain in the far southwest appearing later. But otherwise, some sunshine. However, it will feel cool with that breeze coming from the north, 12 to 14 Celsius in the north, 16 in the south with a bit of sunshine. And the rain continues for Cornwall, West Devon through the evening, before eventually peeling away later in the night. The showers also continue into the north and the east coast, as well as for parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. In between, some clear spells and a cool night to come, with temperatures fairly widely 6 to 8 Celsius and in sheltered spots down to the low single figures. So perhaps a touch of grass frost first thing Wednesday, but otherwise a bright start for many. We've still got some showers coming into the north of Scotland, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, but the persistent rain in the far southwest will have disappeared. And it's a bright day otherwise, away from those showers, with less of a wind. Temperatures reaching 15 or 16 in the south, 12 to 14 again further north. Now, later Wednesday, an area of more persistent rain pushes into parts of southeast Scotland, northeast England, and that spreads south across northern England into the Midlands through the evening. Otherwise, clear spells, and then Thursday's another day of sunny spells and showers. Friday sees some more persistent rain and strong winds.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio,
And online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News Channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters, with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Muroki, and Inaya Falarin Iman. We're on your TV, radio and online.
Yes, we're with you until midday with today's top stories, talking to expert guests and lots of your views as well as ours.
Yes, and the email you need to get them in is gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll get to some of your views throughout the last hour of the show, but first, it's time for the latest news.
A very good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Chancellor is meeting city investors this morning to discuss a possible deregulation package. Kwasi Kwarteng will meet with pension funds, insurers and asset managers ahead of revealing a new medium-term fiscal plan. He hopes that will bring down debt levels. Well, it's after the pound appeared to have recovered some of its losses as the markets reopened this morning, having hit a record-breaking low against the dollar yesterday. Hundreds of mortgage products have been withdrawn by lenders after the Bank of England said it wouldn't hesitate to raise interest rates. Well, economic commentator Laurie Laird told GB News she believes the pound may fall again.
I can tell you that the pound has stabilised a bit. We're at between 107 and 108. How long we stay here is anyone's guess. Neither statement from the Treasury, neither the one from the Treasury, one from the Bank of England were particularly convincing to me. So I wouldn't be surprised to see people have another pop at the pound. We've stabilised now, but I think we'll try it. We'll see another sell-off at some point sooner rather than later.
The Labour leader will use today's party conference speech to offer the country what he calls a fresh start. Sir Keir Starmer is going to commit to getting the UK out of what he calls is a so-called endless cycle of crisis. He's going to quote predecessor Sir Tony Blair, who once described Labour as the political wing of the British people. Sir Keir will go into the speech quite encouraged by the latest polling. A YouGov survey showed that Labour's opened up a 17-point lead over the Conservatives. Ofgem has issued a warning to most of the UK's gas and electricity suppliers that they need to provide more support to households who are struggling to pay their bills. The energy regulator says all providers, bar one, need to fulfil their obligations in helping customers who have difficulty in paying. Following a market review, it found process failures in companies giving help to those who need payment plans. British Gas is the only supplier found not to have any major issues. New research suggests that millions of people in the UK have taken on an additional job to manage the rising cost of living. Insurer Royal London surveyed 4,000 adults and concluded that over 5 million of us have taken on a second role to manage finances, and another 10 million plan to do so. 4 in 5 people surveyed have already made changes to help pay for the rise in prices. Workers at the UK's largest shipping container port are staging fresh strikes from today in a dispute over pay. It's around 1,900 members of the Unite union at Felixstowe who've walked out this morning following an 8-day stoppage last month. The strike is planned to continue until next Wednesday. Our reporter's been speaking to some of those on the picket line this morning.
We estimated or calculated that the company has made close to £250 million over the last 2 years. And as workers who generate that profit, we believe we deserve a decent pay rise. And we believe the company can afford it. They're choosing not to.
They should be taken as serious because it's a very serious matter at the end of the day. We need to get this resolved so we can all get back into work and carry on with our jobs.
Torture, extrajudicial killings and ill treatment have been carried out by Russian forces, so says the United Nations. The latest report says Putin's invasion of Ukraine led to a wide range of human rights violations. It's also called for immediate steps to demilitarise the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Moscow did not immediately comment on the report, but have previously denied allegations of human rights abuses. The head of Britain's biggest police force says he wants to hear from those who feel they've been let down by the service. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, said the organisation has been far too weak and that constructive anger from the public can bring positive change. Well, Sir Mark took over as the boss at Scotland Yard earlier this month, and he says he's determined to get the culture right. Japan has held a state funeral for former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the first such funeral in 55 years. Abe's ashes were carried in a military procession through central Tokyo to a 19-gun salute. Thousands of spectators queued to lay flowers and bowed to a picture of the former premier. The ceremony, though, was not without controversy. Nationwide protests took place, arguing the event was too expensive, being held at a time of economic struggle in the country. King Charles's new cipher's been released as the period of royal mourning ends. Well, the cipher features the King's first initial, C, intertwined with the letter R, standing for Rex, which is the Latin for king. His Majesty's monogram will appear on government buildings, state documents and some post boxes. New banknotes featuring the King are also expected to enter circulation by mid-2024, with his portrait appearing on existing designs of all 4 denominations. Well, the Royal Mail have unveiled 4 new stamps in memory of the late Queen. The stamps have all been approved by the King and they'll go on sale from November. The second-class stamps in the collection mark the Queen's accession and coronation. The first-class stamps show the monarch standing in her Ambrose cloak. You're now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Muroki, and Inaya Falarian Iman on your TV, radio and online. We're here for another hour until midday. Here's what's coming up.
Yes, we'll be bringing you all of the latest. We'll be bringing you all of the latest from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Our political correspondent Tom Harwood will be giving reaction to the latest YouGov poll, which sees Labour with its largest poll lead over the Conservatives in more than 2 decades.
Yes, meanwhile, NASA has smashed a spacecraft into an asteroid, but don't worry, it's on purpose. It's to see if we could defend ourselves against the eventuality of an asteroid hurtling towards the Earth, while space commentator Andy Lound will tell us the results of this trial.
And finally, museums and galleries in England and Wales will be given powers to dispose of objects in their collection if there are moral grounds to do so. We'll be speaking to Peter Tatchell about this later.
Yes, that's all coming up, as well as much more across the programme, across the next hour. And get in touch with your views, GBviews at gbnews.uk, because we'll be going to those as well.
Now, the Labour Party conference in Liverpool is entering its penultimate day, where Sir Keir Starmer is expected to tell his party that he is ready to offer the country a fresh start under his leadership.
Yes, and that fresh start may come sooner than expected, because a new YouGov survey puts Labour in front of the Conservatives by a record margin, 17 points in fact. That since Friday's mini budget, support for the Tories has fallen by 4 points to just 28%, while Labour's has risen by to 45%.
It is the biggest Labour lead in a poll since 2001, so that is going to be giving them a lot of confidence. Well, here to explain what all of this means is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Thank you for joining us again, Tom. I mean, is this Keir Starmer's strategy essentially wait for the Conservatives to disappoint and then kind of come in, rather than actually creating a vision where there's a genuine alternative?
It's a very quiet strategy from the Labour leader. He has been criticised in previous years for being frankly dull, for being frankly boring, for not being that big, rousing figure that we have seen in various other eras in politics. But to some extent, it's a smart strategy from Sir Keir Starmer. If we look over to what happened in Australia earlier this year, a man by the name of Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister. Leader of the Labour Party in that country had been criticised for being bland, for being boring, for not really having all that much to say, for being saying, well, in the words of the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, describing Sir Keir Starmer as a great big plastic bollard. Potentially, that could be a winning strategy if there's seen to be something more chaotic as the other side of the ledger. But that's to some extent a gamble, because yes, we are seeing turmoil at the moment in the markets. The question is, would that last forever, or might it be that there is some short-term pain for potentially long-term gain in the Conservative Party's strategy? That is the big question that Labour strategists will be pondering today. Because yes, it is true that the Labour Party has a 17-point lead 2 years out from a general election in the latest YouGov poll. But if we cast our minds back to February 1981, Margaret Thatcher was 16 points behind Michael Foot in the polls. That was 2 years out from the 1983 general election, and that was a general election that Margaret Thatcher won by a historic margin. So just a bit of a health check, a bit of a warning there when it comes to looking at those polls. Things can change, and the Conservative Party is absolutely throwing all of its eggs in the basket of economic growth. If that gamble pays off, Liz Truss could well see her polling position markedly improve. If it doesn't, well, the Conservatives are on course for a heavy, heavy defeat. But, of course, that is 2 years away, we expect, that next general election. Before then, there is a lot of politicking to get done. And you're right, Sir Keir Starmer will be speaking to the Labour Party conference at 2 p.m. this afternoon, laying out his stall and potentially trying to be a little bit more rousing, a little bit more exciting in front of a conference that really does feel, at this stage, like it is preparing for government.
Well, Tom, thank you for that. I know you'll be bringing us all the updates from today as well, including all the analysis and reaction to Sir Keir Starmer's speech later on. It's expected at 2 p.m. and we'll be bringing you that here on GB News. Well, we're going to speak to Martin Baxter now, who's the CEO of Electoral Calculus. It's a polling company. Great to have you on the show today. A few weeks ago, Electoral Calculus, your organisation, put out some predictions based on polling, or poll of polls. And you predicted a Labour Party majority, the first in 8 years. The polling we're seeing today suggests that actually they're in an even stronger position. Do you think that majority would be even bigger now?
Short answer is yes. I mean, it's a very interesting time at the moment. Equally, you're right to say that a poll of polls is a bit more accurate than a single poll. So we got this YouGov poll just out recently with a 17% lead, which is very large. But if we look at the poll of polls where we're at the moment, it's around an 11% lead for Labour, which is certainly enough for a very reasonable majority. We also did a poll with Savanta Comres and Labour List that came out of the weekend, which polled before the mini budget, and that had a 12% Labour lead. So YouGov are not very much out of line. It remains to be seen whether it's quite as bad as it looks. But even on the poll of polls, it looks like a Labour majority. But it is worth mentioning similar points to Tom was just saying, that the last time there was a poll of polls as large as this for Labour, it was back in March 2013, where there was another 12% lead for Labour under the then Labour leader Ed Miliband against David Cameron. But people will remember, of course, Ed Miliband did not win the next election. That did not come off. So success is not guaranteed for Labour, but it's looking quite good for them at the moment. And the feeling generally politically is perhaps different from it was in the early days of the Cameron coalition government, that the Conservatives have been in power for 12 years, events are crowding up on them. And of course, there's this economic situation playing out at the same time. So Labour are not home and dry, but Labour are certainly in a good position at the moment, and they're probably going to have a happy conference over it.
And also, Martin, what about the kind of favourability of the various different people in the cabinet and the shadow cabinet? I mean, what is the public sense of how much they like or how popular Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner are compared to Kwasi Kwarteng and the Prime Minister Liz Truss?
Well, that's a kind of interesting one. The kind of, as far as the public's concerned, none of them are terribly exciting. But I do remember it was very different when Boris Johnson was moving into being Conservative leader, because he was genuinely popular with large parts of the country. And we saw that in the polling from some distance off. I mean, it was very, the meter was almost off the scale there. When we did similar polling for Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak during their election campaign, we were not finding they were generating any excitement at all, really, with the public. And that seems to have been held true as Liz Truss has become Prime Minister. She seemed to get no fillip from that. Equally, on the other side, Keir Starmer is not a sort of Tony Blair natural charismatic vote winner himself. He's playing it kind of steady and not being trying not to repel people, I guess. But neither candidate is super charismatic. But at the moment, Labour are ahead. I wouldn't say it was particularly due to the popularity of the leader, rather that in comparison, say, with the last election when they had Jeremy Corbyn as leader, who did put a lot of people, well, let's say worried a lot of people, made them reluctant to vote Labour. Keir Starmer has removed those worries. So the Conservatives have removed an election winner and Labour have removed an election loser, and that may account for most of the difference that we're seeing at the moment.
I just wonder, obviously the economy is always sort of the top issue that people are thinking about when it comes to deciding who to vote. And I just wonder what we're going to see in terms of the balance between the micro economy of people's actual pockets and pay packets and what they have to spend right now, and these macro questions we're looking at now, the global economy, the pound. What's more important to people when they're making that assessment as to which party is more responsible?
Well, I think you're right that the economy is now the biggest issue. It didn't used to be. Through a lot of the last 20 years or so, other issues like the NHS, immigration were playing a lot. The economy is now the big issue. You're right, there's a lot of headwinds. COVID was very expensive, and we're essentially paying the price of that now with inflation and the cost of living. Plus, we've got the fact that interest rates have been historically very, very low, maybe in a way that some economists say is unsustainable. They've been going up. In a way, that's a natural process. The government hasn't really prepared people for that, because that, in the end, is going to mean higher mortgage bills, possibly lower house prices, and corrections in maybe some of the asset prices as well. So the end result of all that may well be growth in the long term. The question for the Conservative government is whether there's going to be growth in the short term, because in the short term, there's certainly deflationary pressures along with the tax stimulus that they did in the mini budget on Friday. So you're right, it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. It's hard to predict in detail, but the best guess is that there's going to be economic pain before there's economic gain. So the question for the Conservatives will be whether the gain is showing up in time for the election, or whether the tax cuts prove to be popular. But according to, going back to the latest YouGov poll, the mini budget's not looking so popular as it hits the ground. So the Conservatives will need results rather than words to get their popularity back up again.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the programme, Martin Baxter, CEO of Electoral Calculus, and hopefully you'll come on again, because that was very insightful across the board. Well, we're just going to go to some of your views, and you've been sending many views on the different subjects we've been talking about in relation to landlords, some of the announcements by the Labour Party, but also on chest binding of young girls, the transgender charity Mermaid, and there's been many people expressing a lot of concern, to say the least, about that.
Yes, well, I think that's a really interesting. He had to take early retirement through ill health, and he invested in a second property the rent and take them to court to get them out, costing us more of our own money. It's not always easy for landlords. We are good landlords, and that's what we were talking about earlier in terms of, well, the point I was making is that most people with second homes or who are landlords, they're just people who've invested in a second property. They're not necessarily rich people. They're just people who've invested in a second property to bring in some extra money for themselves and their families. And they do have it rough often when they have bad tenants, when they have to pump their own money into that, because some tenants aren't good tenants.
Yeah, I think that the fair point that I would agree with is the one that Landlords aren't necessarily responsible for the housing crisis. You know, the government have had decades to build huge amounts of homes which they have failed to do so. And actually, you know, even though many people benefited from the right to buy, so many council properties were sold off and not very many were built, and that has contributed to the problem. So there is a whole range of factors that have contributed to the housing crisis in that respect.
Yes, well, keep getting in touch with your views. We are here for another 40 minutes, so get them in. But after the break, why have NASA crashed a spacecraft into an asteroid on purpose? Well, we'll catch up with a space commentator, Andy Loud, who's going to be telling us about all of that. It has been a successful mission, so stay tuned to hear about that after this weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McKibben from the Met Office. Some sunshine out there today, but a number of showers, and it will be damp in the far southwest with some persistent rain for parts of Cornwall and West Devon, with this weather front which just slides in from the west. It really only affects the far southwest, perhaps thickens up the cloud for Northern Ireland as well. And another feature will bring some heavy showers to the north of Scotland. These showers could be combined with rumbles of thunder, and there'll be blustery winds as well coming from the north. Those northerly winds will also push showers into the north of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, northwest England and North Wales. And we've got that persistent rain in the far southwest appearing later. But otherwise, some sunshine. However, it will feel cool with that breeze coming from the north, 12 to 14 Celsius in the north, 16 in the south with a bit of sunshine. And the rain continues for Cornwall, West Devon through the evening, before eventually peeling away later in the night. The showers also continue into the north and the east coast, as well as for parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. In between, some clear spells and a cool night to come, with temperatures fairly widely 6 to 8 Celsius and in sheltered spots down to the low single figures. So perhaps a touch of grass frost first thing Wednesday, but otherwise a bright start for many. We've still got some showers coming into the north of Scotland, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, but the persistent rain in the far southwest will have disappeared. And it's a bright day otherwise, away from those showers, with less of a wind. Temperatures reaching 15 or 16 in the south, 12 to 14 again further north. Now, later Wednesday, an area of more persistent rain pushes into parts of southeast Scotland, northeast England, and that spreads south across northern England into the Midlands through the evening. Otherwise, clear spells, and then Thursday's another day of sunny spells and showers. Friday sees some more persistent rain and strong winds.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio, and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters, with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
It's 11:24. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman and Mercy Muroki. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, now Britain was presented with that so-called mini-budget from Chancellor Kwesi Kwarteng last week, and it is now the turn of the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, well, the EU member country shares an important trade border with Britain, and of course it is involved in the Northern Ireland Protocol, designed to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, so how much will Ireland's budget announcement today affect Britain, and what can we expect from it? Well, our Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie joins us live from Dublin to give us the latest. Good morning, Doogie. So what are the people of the Republic of Ireland expecting when they hear that budget later on?
Well, it is to be a £6.7 billion giveaway. It appears it is Micheál Martin, the Taoiseach. It is his final budget because he's part of a coalition government between Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Greens. So in December, the reins of that government will be handed over to the Taoiseach, expected to be Leo Varadkar. So in that, they've got to be careful what they're giving away and who they're giving it to. But in amongst that is £12 extra on every pension. There is €12 extra on every benefit that is going. But in that as well is things that we wouldn't really associate with, as in no child cost for any child under 16 going to hospital. They're dropping the hospital charges. Free books for primary schools. All these things we take for granted in Britain because they're paid for us. We have the national health, etc. So it is a very small economy here. It has about £365 billion or $1 billion per year GDP, compared to Britain, which is about $2.7 to $3 trillion gross domestic product. But the one thing that has been a very big thorn in everybody's side down here is that Sinn Féin, that is the largest party here, although they haven't enough for a government, have been insisting on a price cap on fuel. Now, with the size of the economy here, that could not be done, and some of the Taoiseach Doylers behind me I have spoken to have said that there's definitely not. They have had too many open-ended guarantees with banks that bit them hard in 2007, and they're not prepared to do that again. So what has it for Britain? Well, very little, actually. Just with the pound falling, it's costing us more to travel into the Eurozone and to buy our goods back from it. We'll see by the end of the day how many protests have got up and running. The barriers in behind me now. But all in all, it should be a pretty popular budget.
Well, Doogie, thank you for updating us on that. And we know you'll come back and tell us what is said in that budget a bit later on when it's delivered. Doogie Beattie there, Northern Ireland reporter.
Yeah, no, we still haven't heard a lot about the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is still an ongoing issue. Obviously,
Yes,
Liz Truss
very much
was
so.
dealing with that, so that may well be at the top of the agenda very soon. Well, in other news, interesting news, NASA has successfully smashed a spacecraft into an asteroid 7 million miles from Earth.
Well, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, called DART, is the first ever trial of a planetary defence system, which sounds like something from a sci-fi movie.
Yeah, well, NASA picked a pair of asteroids, the 780-metre wide Didymos, and its moon Dimorphos, which is 160 metres wide, about the size of the Great Pyramid, so quite large, fairly large.
Yes, well, the aim of the collision was to make sure any impact wouldn't send a previously harmless piece of rock spiralling towards the Earth. Well, this is slightly, way out of my range of understanding. So let's speak to somebody who does know about all of this stuff and can explain it to us, space commentator Andrew Lound. Great to have you. So just start from the beginning in layman's terms. Just explain what this mission was about and why it has been successful.
Yes, good morning. Yeah, I mean, the principle is the Earth faces a threat from asteroids colliding with it, large ones, much larger than what we actually looked at in the hours of this morning. For instance, 60 million years ago, an asteroid slammed into the Earth, which caused a climate change, which led to the extinction of the dinosaurs, which ironically enough led to the rise of mammals and us. So we owe our lives to their impact. But a future impact could lead to the extinction of our species and change the Earth considerably. So the aim is just what on earth can we do about it, really, to mitigate this? And if we have enough notice, if an asteroid is heading towards us, we could perhaps deflect it, and we deflect it by crashing something into it. The whole idea is that the inertia from the spacecraft is transferred straight to the asteroid. A bit like when you're in your car and you slam your brakes on and you go flying forward. So you transfer that energy. And when you do that, you can actually deflect the asteroid away from us. And it will be a fraction of a degree, but with years and years notice, a fraction of a degree could turn out to be tens of thousands of kilometres where it would miss the Earth. And this mission was to test to see if the physics, we've got the physics right, if it could possibly be true. And we did it on a very small object. So you've got the main asteroid itself, Didymos, and its little moon Dimorphos. And the idea is, if we use a little bit of propery, if you've got the main asteroid here, you've got the little thing going around it, you crash into the little one, and then its orbit should be altered slightly. Now, if we've actually achieved that, if that's been actually achieved, then we've proven from a physics and mechanical point of view, we could, in principle, deflect something away that's heading towards the Earth, giving enough time and notice. And that's what this test was all about. And the test so far has been utterly spectacular. And now the difficult part is, or the hard part is the maths, where all the observatories around the world which have been observing it as well, we've got a new release of image from the Atlas project showing the actual flare and the cone of material coming away from it, is to see how much of a deflection has been placed on that asteroid. And from that, we can get a calculation then to give an estimate of what we need to do to deflect an asteroid which is very similar to this type, because all asteroids are actually quite different. Looking at what I've seen so far from the plume, there doesn't appear to have been any water or much water at all on this asteroid. It was just seemed to be more of a rocky piece of material, and that's because there's no constant outgassing from it for what we can see so far. And that does suggest, of course, that we're going to have some good data on the type of asteroid which could pose a threat to us.
Well, that is, fascinating, and I mean, I'm someone that is really interested in the way in which we're trying to expand our understanding, of the universe and so on. I mean, and I don't want to sound like a party pooper or anything, but I do wonder, what about space junk? Because we've got all these satellites floating around the Earth, and if we're kind of smashing things into other things, that space junk could actually, cause potential problems for us in the future, and that often seems to be outside of the conversation.
You've made a very important point here, and that is fortunately, it is part of the conversation at the moment. Britain's been playing a big role in this with two designs to actually reduce space junk, working with the European Space Agency. The United States now are working very closely on a project to reduce space junk because it is becoming the biggest threat to us. Modern satellites, when they're launched, have to have the ability to deorbit and to bring them back when they're not in use. Unfortunately, most of the satellites which are up there, which are the old ones are no longer usable, are still just drifting around up there. And of course there's bits which are broken up. There's been deliberate anti-satellite missile and laser tests to break satellites up and leave a load of debris up there, which is a great threat, especially if we're trying to do more work in low Earth orbit, or even perhaps going to the moon and Mars. We need to sort of clear up this junk, and there is a big project at the moment to try and sort that out, because you're absolutely right. Even a small fleck of paint travelling at 17,000 10,500 miles per hour.
No, you're
when
right.
that hits you, we're back to the inertia thing again. That energy is transferred.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that insightful analysis. Andrew Lound, a space commentator, really interesting stuff.
I'm not sure I'd want to know if there was an asteroid hurtling towards the Earth.
You just want it to destroy
I just
the
want
planet?
to know. I don't want to know when I'm going to die a horrible death, really. But,
No, I think...
destroy the planet. Anyway, after the break, we're going to be speaking about something entirely different. Museums and galleries in England and Wales are being given special powers to remove objects for moral reasons. They're not allowed to at the moment, not quite anyway. We'll look into more of that after these morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 11:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Chancellor is meeting city investors to discuss a possible deregulation package. Kwasi Kwarteng is talking with pension funds, insurers and asset managers ahead of revealing a new medium-term fiscal plan, which he hopes will bring down debt. It's after the pound appeared to have recovered some of its losses as markets reopened this morning, having hit a record-breaking low against the dollar yesterday. Hundreds of mortgage products have been withdrawn by lenders after the Bank of England said it wouldn't hesitate to raise interest rates. The Labour leader is going to use today's party conference speech to offer the country what he calls a fresh start. Sir Keir Starmer will commit to getting the UK out of a so-called endless cycle of crisis, he says. He's also going to quote Tony Blair, who once described Labour as the political wing of the British people. Sir Keir will go into the speech encouraged by the latest YouGov polling, which shows Labour is currently 17 points ahead. Workers at the UK's largest container port are staging fresh strikes from today in a dispute over pay. Around 1,900 members of the Unite union at Felixstowe have walked out following an 8-day stoppage last month. The strike is planned to continue until next Wednesday. Ofgem has issued a warning to most of the UK's gas and electricity suppliers that they need to provide more support to households struggling to pay their bills. Following a market review, the energy regulator says all providers need to fulfil their obligations in helping customers who have difficulty paying. Royal Mail have unveiled 4 new stamps in memory of the Queen. Approved by King Charles III, the postage will go on sale from November. They feature images of the late monarch throughout the years. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We're talking of finance. Let's have a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will currently buy you $1.079 and 1.122 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,514 and 43 pence per ounce.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland, Wales
And Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:38 and this is To The Point with myself, Mercy Muroki and Inaya Falarin Iman on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Yes, well, around 1,900 workers at the port of Felixstowe, the UK's busiest shipping container port, begin an 8-day strike today. Workers were given a 7% pay rise, which their trade union, Unite, claims is an effective pay cut due to how high inflation is.
Yes, well, joining us now is GB News' national reporter Theo Chikomba from the picket line in Felixstowe. Good morning, Theo. Great to speak to you. What are workers telling you? Because many will say, look, a 7% pay rise, fantastic.
Yeah, well, good morning. You're absolutely right. Some would say 7% is quite good in this current climate. Some other public sector workers getting a lot less. Well, I've been here since the early hours of this morning, and many of the workers are saying, well, the inflation rate is around 10%. The cost of living is going up and we are feeling the pinch. They've done this at a really busy time. Christmas is approaching. Retailers are now stocking up as people begin to buy Christmas presents and presents for other things as well. But the workers here are saying now is the time to hear about what we can do to go forward. And just earlier on, I spoke to some of them, but also spoke to a representative spokesperson for the Port of Felixstowe.
Well, we're very disappointed there's another strike today. We're implementing what we think is a very fair pay deal. The pay deal dates from the 1st of January when CPI inflation was 5.4%, and the pay deal we're implementing is 7% plus £500. So that's worth over 8% this year to everybody here. Collective bargaining process with the union has been exhausted. We've been unable to reach an agreement with them, and it's not fair.
So yes, 1,900 members of Unite are taking part in this 8-day strike. Many of them are going to be coming back later this afternoon. You can probably see behind me, there's no one here at the moment. They're doing what they're calling shifts this time around. They were here striking again in August, and they were staying pretty much most of the day, but this time they've decided to change things around. But will there be a deal? It's not quite clear yet. Having spoken to the spokesperson for the Port of Felixstowe, they've said they've exhausted all avenues with the union, and it's just a case of waiting. Many of them will be coming back later this afternoon and for the next 7 days.
Well, Theo, thank you for bringing us that update. Theo Chikomba, there, our national reporter.
Well, in other news, museums and galleries in England and Wales will be given unprecedented powers to dispose of objects in their collection if there is a compelling moral obligation to do so under a new charities
objects, with only some narrow exceptions.
However, the new laws mean charity trustees could make a moral case to remove items, which has prompted some critics to suggest the law might be used to get rid of things that some might deem offensive. So,
yes, well, our next guest, Peter Tatchell, is the director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, a human rights organisation, and he joins us now. Really good to have you. Charity law is not the sexiest thing in the world, so it's not surprising this hasn't necessarily been picked up by much of the media. But is it true what some are saying, that, look, if trustees of a museum think an item's a bit too controversial, perhaps it's offensive racially or because of homophobia, Islamophobia, whatever, then this law could be effectively used to remove those items or displays from museums and galleries?
No, this legislation is not about removing offensive items. It's about restitution. So it's about looking at museum and art gallery collections where objects have been acquired, perhaps in centuries past, through looting and conquest. So we're talking about things like the Elgin marbles, which were taken from the Parthenon in Greece. The argument is that these objects should really belong back on the Parthenon where they were taken from. And I think, most British people would agree that, it'd be horrific if some other country to conquest had taken our crown jewels or taken the body of Winston Churchill and displayed it in a museum in Berlin or New York. That's all it's about. It's about restitution for objects taken under dubious circumstances.
Well, Peter, I mean, many people would say that the role, fundamentally, the moral role of museums and galleries is preserving history, preserving heritage. And actually, oftentimes, when we look at history, many things were acquired through morally questionable ways. And therefore, if we're examining every single artefact, every single work, you perhaps could find a link to something that may be morally objectionable today. That's not necessarily a reason to get rid of it.
Well, I don't think the argument is that all objects should be up for restitution. I think it's just the key ones, like the Elgin marbles or, for example, the Benin bronzes. These were magnificent works of art taken from West Africa in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, which were basically looted from the state of Benin in West Africa. And I think it's quite right that they belong back in what is now modern-day Nigeria and related states. So, I think it's just about fairness and decency. Of course, I think any museums that do decide to give back these works of art, they should make duplicate copies so that we in Britain can see these magnificent works of art from West Africa and many other countries. But I think they really belong where they were taken from.
And just finally, I mean, you mentioned the Benin bronzes and so on, but many people would argue that actually they've been conserved much better in some of these great museums. And actually, when you look at some of the National Gallery and other galleries and so on, these are actually places where the world goes. I mean, London is the foremost city, one of them in the world. So people travel from all over the world to see these in ways that they may not otherwise do if they went back to some of these smaller countries with less established museums.
Well, you're right. British museums and art galleries have done a great job of conservation. And indeed, if those objects had remained in those countries centuries past, maybe they would have been lost or destroyed or otherwise disposed of. But we're talking about now, and I think there is a very strong moral claim for major works of art that were looted by conquest from other countries, that they are sent back, as is being requested. For example, the Greek government has long been pressing for the return of the Elgin marbles, and I think that's right and proper. They do belong on the Parthenon, and they would look better there than they do in the British Museum, magnificent though the British Museum's display is. I think really this is just about, recognising that, we have a great global heritage, and you're right, if we'd have to go and travel to Greece to see the Elgin marbles, that's true. But it's really where they belong, and, they were taken from Greece under very dubious, questionable circumstances. I think we should just do the morally right thing and have, good copies in their place in the British Museum, so we can still admire the essence of the art. They may not be the originals, but if they are perfect copies, we are seeing what was on the Parthenon.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter Tatchell, thanks for putting forward your argument for that, Director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, which is a human rights organisation. Thanks for joining us. Well, let's now go to our reporter, Ellie Costello, who is looking at how businesses are being affected by the pound dropping to a record low yesterday, and what against the dollar that was, and what that might mean for them. Ellie's been speaking to a restaurant owner facing massive bill increases.
Good morning from Tapas Revolution in Westfield in Stratford. This is an authentic Spanish-style restaurant. This is a Spanish restaurant group. They have 10 restaurants in the UK. And we're here, of course, reacting to the fall in the pound. And we're talking about how that's going to impact on businesses, specifically restaurants that import a lot of their produce. So I'm going to speak now to Omar Aliboy, who is the executive chef and the founder of Tapas Revolution. Omar, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. So how is the fall in the pound going to affect your business?
Well, we are incredibly concerned about it, and obviously it's not immediate. It'll take a little bit of time, but the reality is that a weaker pound means weaker purchasing power, quite simply. And it's not just about the dollar, it's about the euro as well. We buy in pounds, obviously, but our wholesalers, the people that we buy our ingredients from, things like fish, products from Asia, everything happens in dollars. Any trading good happens in dollars. Things like olives, for example. Spain is the largest producer of table olives in the world, 50% of the world's production. The same as olive oil, it's going up in a month. They are saying somewhere in between 20 and 25%. So everybody at home, stock up some olive oil before that happens. But and these are things because of the draft as well, not just the weaker pound, but the draft. But at the minute, everything is quite gloomy. There is so many reasonings. Have some Manchego cheese as well. You know, obviously, we could buy local cheese, yes, but we are all about provenance and about differentiation. And you can simply not just go and eat the same old everywhere. We've all traveled the world. We like to feel like we are on holidays, and that's what we do. And I brought some breadsticks, something really simple, probably one of the cheapest products that one can think of. The reality that has two ingredients that have massively increased in price: grain, wheat in this case, olive oil. So bread will go up massively very, very soon as well. The most concerning of all is obviously inflation. People's pockets are getting smaller, and as a result, it may result in lower sales too, which that is something that unfortunately, unless you become a heavily discounted business, there is nothing you can do about it. And that's not us, because we use good produce and we hire good chefs to cook our food.
Well, for restaurant owners like Omar, there are going to be significant challenges to face in the next few months, and they may have to start thinking creatively with their supply chains to try and mitigate that financial impact on their customers.
Oh, thank you, Ellie. Those olives, I'm so glad it's nearly lunchtime, because those olives looked really good.
Olive with cheese.
Yeah, I think I might. I think I know what I'm having for lunch now. Now, our final story. Members of the public are being warned of a new scam trend where criminals pose as your family members, asking for money to help pay for bills.
Yes, well, TSB Bank has already recorded a 58% increase in the amount of friends and family scams this past July compared to the same time last year, as the cost of living crisis worsens.
Yes, well, according to its own research, even lending £500 to one of these scammers could lead to 3/5 of households struggling to afford food for a week. But the average loss, they say, is actually £1,500.
Yes, well, here to help us learn how to identify and avoid these scams is Laura Retty, personal finance and business broadcaster. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it does seem these scammers are constantly finding new ways, almost, I guess, by definition, to scam people. And so how can people avoid this? Because presumably you would kind of call up your family member to clarify what are they doing and how can people avoid it?
So this particular scam is an online scam, typically where criminals use online profiles to pretend to be the dependents or the children of their targets before requesting funds to help them pay bills. 89% of cases reported use that it's WhatsApp that they're using. So you may get a text saying, "Hi mum, I've lost my phone. This is my new number. I really need help with a train ticket to get me home," that kind of thing. And a lot of people are just doing it automatically because they're assuming it's their children, which is really scary. And it's really horrible that these scammers are, pulling on the heartstrings specifically to get money. So, I mean, there's lots of different other scams around at the moment as well. Ones that are saying about, claim here to get your energy bill refund of £400, or to get help with the cost of living, click here. So there is a lot of them going around. So you have to be extra vigilant at the moment. In terms of what to do to avoid being scammed, essentially, if you've been asked for money that you weren't expecting, or been asked to be given any personal information at all, simply don't do it. If it's an organisation that you're familiar with and they're trying to mock them and pretend to be them, then simply phone that organisation directly, specifically if it's your bank. That's the big one, I would say. And also resist the pressure to act immediately. A lot of these scammers try and get you to act straight away, which is when you're not really thinking. So slow down, think about, okay, is this real? And also maybe talk to a loved one that you trust who's particularly savvy about these things and say to them, do you think this is correct and legitimate? Don't rush into it. And the other thing is to review the company's social media profile. If there has been some scams going on, they quite regularly warn you on social media to say, this scam is happening, don't fall for it.
Excuse me, and what can people do if this has happened to them, they've fallen victim to it? Because it can happen to anybody. You know, there used to be a perception, a misconception that it only happens to people who, you know, aren't very smart. But I know people who are very vigilant, incredibly vigilant online, and have still fallen victim to it and have almost been embarrassed about it. What can people do, or who do they reach out to when they've lost money as a result?
And I'm smiling here because sadly I've been a victim twice to scammers myself, and I'm a personal finance expert. So this just goes to show how vigilant you need to be, because scammers have become increasingly sophisticated with the way that they pretend to be organisations, the way they look, the feel. Once upon a time you could spot them because there'd be bad spelling mistakes. Those days are long gone. So if you're worried that you've been scammed, call your bank directly. For speed and ease, you can call the new hotline 159 or report the scam to Action Fraud via their website. If you wish to seek further help, contact Citizens Advice. If you see on Facebook a scam and you think that's definitely a scam, select the 3 dots in the right-hand corner of the ad and select Report Ad, and also forward any scam emails to report@phishing.gov.uk. Just be very, very vigilant, and if you are scammed, you may be entitled to your money back, but not automatically. It does depend on how you've made that transfer with your money.
Well, thank you so much for that advice, Laura Retty, personal finance and business broadcaster, and also a scam victim there. And it is a very interesting one. I mean, I've been watching quite a few programmes recently of a lot of these scammers who prey on older single women, oftentimes women that are widows and so on. And they're often from West Africa, these men that pose as, wealthy men.
What, you mean that person I gave my bank details is not a Nigerian prince? That's shocking.
But this is a common thing. And a lot of older women, unfortunately, fall victim to it. So these scammers will use anything in order to get...
and I've been telling you, somebody's created a fake account of me and just stolen all my pictures. And they've been having conversations with people, and people have genuinely been thinking it's me. Just normal conversations. Maybe their eventual plan was to, after they've sort of, had normal conversations with people and made them believe it's me, to ask them for money.
Yeah.
So, people very much are doing this nowadays, and they can very much imitate your loved ones and your friends.
Especially when everything's online.
Absolutely, yes. Well, that is it from us here at To The Point, but we'll be back tomorrow, both of us, so don't go away. But up next is GB News Day with Mark Longhurst and Gloria De Piero, so stay tuned for that.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Some sunshine out there today, but a number of showers, and it will be damp in the far southwest with some persistent rain for parts of Cornwall and West Devon, with this weather front which just slides in from the west. It really only affects the far southwest, perhaps thickens up the cloud for Northern Ireland as well. And another feature will bring some heavy showers to the north of Scotland. These showers could be combined with rumbles of thunder, and there'll be blustery winds as well coming from the north. Those northerly winds will also push showers into the north of Northern Ireland, western Scotland, northwest England and North Wales. And we've got that persistent rain in the far southwest appearing later. But otherwise, some sunshine. However, it will feel cool with that breeze coming from the north, 12 to 14 Celsius in the north, 16 in the south with a bit of sunshine. And the rain continues for Cornwall, West Devon through the evening, before eventually peeling away later in the night. The showers also continue into the north and the east coast, as well as for parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. In between, some clear spells and a cool night to come, with temperatures fairly widely 6 to 8 Celsius and in sheltered spots down to the low single figures. So perhaps a touch of grass frost first thing Wednesday, but otherwise a bright start for many. We've still got some showers coming into the north of Scotland, as well as parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, but the persistent rain in the far southwest will have disappeared. And it's a bright day otherwise, away from those showers with less of a wind. Temperatures reaching 15 or 16 in the south, 12 to 14 again further north. Now, later Wednesday, an area of more persistent rain pushes into parts of southeast Scotland, northeast England, and that spreads south across northern England into the Midlands through the evening. Otherwise, clear spells, and then Thursday's another day of sunny spells and showers. Friday sees some more persistent rain and strong winds.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark